Hey guys, welcome back to inSTEM. I'm super excited to present to you our guest today, Simran Mohnani. She is quite simply a trailblazer. She is a multi-award winning chemical engineer turned consultant. She is a prominent voice for young people. She's a One Young World ambassador, a World Economic Forum young global shaper, and a passionate advocate for diversity and inclusion. And the list goes on. Welcome on board, Simran.
Thank you. That's very kind.
It's a big intro, but they're all your accolades.
Thank
In
you.
today's interview, we're going to be diving into her passion for sustainability, her switch from process engineering to consulting at a top firm, and all the amazing initiatives she champions outside of her 9 to 5. We are going to be discovering today what it truly means to have a well-rounded career. Hello again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. I know we've been trying to plan this for a couple of months now, and it's lovely to meet you in person and to finally be able to get in a studio together and share your career journey.
Yep.
So, as you might know, the custom here is we kick off with icebreakers. So,
I'm ready for it.
Are you ready for your icebreaker?
Totally ready.
Awesome. So, your icebreaker question is, if you could choose a fictional character to hang out with, who would it be?
A fictional character.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna have to say Avatar. Avatar Aang from
Fair enough,
the Legend of Aang. They've recently come out with like the new real live version from the cartoon. But I think the reason he stands out to me is like that level of holisticness. You know, kind of recognizing that you need to be at peace with several different parts of yourself. And for him, or the elements, the air, water, fire, earth. And I think that kind of shows me that, there are certain times in your life where you might kind of be focusing energy towards one part of the element in your life, whether that's career or family, etc. But ultimately, what harmony is when you can find how you juggle all of those pieces in the right place.
Oh, awesome. That's such an interesting breakdown. Really excellent answer. So let's rewind to the beginning of your career. I mentioned during your intro that you are a chemical engineer. So I wanted to understand and help our listeners understand as well, what led you to choosing chemical engineering as your degree of choice at university? And how did you know that it was the right path for you?
Sure. Okay. So I'm originally born and brought up on a tiny island called Malta, and which is in the Mediterranean, although I'm Indian by background. And I guess growing up, I was always super fascinated about the inventions that I would hear about in labs, new cancer drugs and new drinking water treatment, etc. But what really excited me was that potential of essentially bringing scientific innovations that could literally change people's lives and actually bringing it into the hands of the masses, because that's truly when it is transformational, right? And so that's kind of what led me into finding out about chemical engineering as a career. I actually always loved chemistry and maths, but they didn't have chemical engineering as a career per se back home, and that's ultimately why I moved to the UK and I'm now settled here, initially to study chemical engineering. But I think I got this really exciting opportunity where I won a competition back home and got flown up to represent my government at this science forum called the London International Youth Science Forum, or LIYSF, for anyone listening. And that is basically the place I found out about chemical engineering. I remember going into the Imperial labs and seeing them create like fake blood in laboratories and harvest hydrogen from algae. And they even had like a CCS, carbon sequestration pilot. And this was like back in 2013 or something. And I literally remember having this like light bulb moment where I was like, this is everything I wanted to do. I just didn't know it had a name to it. So that's ultimately how I ended up choosing chemical engineering. I guess the Maltese part of me, when I was figuring out what I wanted to do as well, it had just kind of hit me, and I started hearing kind of those headlines that, up to 40% of the island I called home might actually disappear underwater due to climate change and rising sea levels. And then it kind of hit me that if I was going to focus on scaling up innovation through chemical engineering, it had to be with that guise of sustainability. So that's kind of why I chose sustainability and chemical engineering together.
That's such an interesting perspective. I'm always very fascinated by how different people, the steps that they took to find out what was right for them to study. And I think that's a very refreshing one to hear as well. So, excellent. So your career spans across many disciplines: process engineering, continuous improvement, manufacturing, and now consulting, and also sustainability, as you've mentioned and highlighted. And the answer to your first question, speaking of the sustainability aspect and just diving deeper into, those changes and potential changes that you were seeing where you were from, how did you know that actually, what was the point of conviction for you to say, I definitely want to work and make a difference in this space?
Yeah, I think I always had an affiliation, or like I felt kind of pulled towards the manufacturing world, even though like my parents didn't really understand that. They were like, and it kind of comes back to just nobody saw females working in that space. And I know we'll probably talk to the stereotypes later, but I was always really fascinated, like I mentioned, about how you bring inventions from labs out to the public. And that is through, the world of factories and supply chains. And that's what brought me there. But this point on, seeing all of the natural disasters happening around us, really feeling that, for me as someone who heard, my island could disappear underwater, like climate change just wasn't, something far away. It was literally like, it was at my door, and it was threatening to kind of barge it down. And so for me, that's where I realized, there is this space called manufacturing, which is super high emitting, but it has a place in society. And at the same time, we just need to find a way to do it better, to do it more sustainably, to do it in a more circular way. And ultimately, that is kind of that intersectionality maybe of like sustainable manufacturing is kind of what pulled me through university, and even is a foundational stone to everything I've done since. So when I actually was looking at my dissertations at university, for my undergrad and master's, I kind of did it in that intersectional lens. So I focused on cultured meat scale up. So the idea of, can you create different scaffolds for lab-borne meat to scale up what ultimately is now becoming quite commercially available. You can go to any restaurant and get lab-grown meat burger, But then for my master's dissertation, I also was working on drinking water and treatment around that. And we can kind of expand a little bit more on my current role, but that is foundational to kind of the work I do in climate tech innovation now too.
That's amazing. I love how you've turned something that could be quite crippling into something quite empowering, and is allowing you and enabling you to make such a difference and to change the narrative. So that's really great. You also made a switch from, quintessential process engineering into management consulting. And I just wanted to understand what the motivation and the psychology was behind that decision.
Yeah. I get asked that question quite a lot, actually. So happy to expand. Essentially, when I was actually studying chemical engineering at the University of Bath, a big foundational part of our degree, and actually one of the reasons I chose Bath, was this idea of an industrial placement. And so for my industrial placement, I thought I've kind of learned all of the theory. I actually really want to understand what it's like being a chemical engineer on the ground. And often when you think about chemical engineer, you think process engineer. And, there are platforms like yours which are breaking down how that's, larger. But for me, at university, fundamentally, I thought chemical engineer means I have to try being a process engineer. So I went and I did that at the Cadbury chocolate factory over in Birmingham. So if anyone wants to talk chocolate engineering, I'm your woman. And that was great in a number of ways for me. It really showed me what it was like to operate on a shop floor. I got a lot of operational level understanding of how to run transformations at scale in a factory. And it's also what taught me the lingo of that I've now taken into kind of manufacturing consulting as well, in terms of working in Industry 4.0, but we'll get into that. And throughout that, I still kind of had sustainability front of mind. I was working on reducing waste in the chocolate factory. But after about a year of doing that, I started realizing there were a couple of things that I wanted to do long term, which wouldn't necessarily be met by a career like that. For one, the idea of progression in being a process engineer wasn't quick enough for me, I guess. You kind of go from being a process engineer to being a senior process engineer, and I was looking for a little bit more kind of managerial, a managerial track. I think secondly, for me, process engineering, I still kind of had this idea of wanting to scale up innovation, right? And I realized that fundamentally when it came to actually getting innovation in factories, companies were actually outsourcing that to consultancies. And that was kind of what first made me think, hey, what is consultancy? You know, another light bulb moment. And then lastly, just before I left the factory, I actually got to do an internship in the R&D practice where I was working on essentially automating chocolate cooling on the ground. And fundamentally, I kind of realized that there was a bit of a bottleneck in bringing these really cool and wacky R&D innovations that would be developed in labs back into the factory. And that idea of kind of being the gateway between this newfound tech in R&D and the manufacturing units that are 40, 50 years old was this idea of systems integration. And I really liked that idea of kind of being a gateway between R&D and manufacturing. And that's why I applied to the systems integration grad scheme at Deloitte. And my idea was very much, go get the digital transformation skills and eventually bring them back to the factory, because that's where chemical engineering and process engineering is headed in 20 years. And I didn't feel like I had that skill set coming out of university.
It's very interesting. Firstly, working in a chocolate factory, did that mean that you got an unlimited supply of chocolate, or am I
honestly yes? So I think one of the things is yes. So any time there was we just have like free boxes of chocolate essentially in the offices. Awesome. We had a staff shop, which was like a third of the price that most people would be able to get it at.
Dream.
Easter time is coming up, and we could get these huge bags of mini eggs, and just lug them home. I remember actually having to pack a 20-kilogram suitcase to fly to my family back in India because there were flavors that we were getting here and that were, that they couldn't get.
Like such a cool experience.
But I think the funniest thing for me was every morning, my one job at 8 a.m. was actually to go to, because I worked in the department of chocolate making. That's actually was
an actual
name.
Department. Wow.
I know. I also lived with a guy called Charlie at the time, so I kind of think of it as like my
Charlie
in the chocolate factory phase of life. I know, like you can't invent this stuff. But so essentially every day at 8 a.m. I had to go and sample the chocolate. So I would literally there'd be this gigantic kind of waterfall of chocolate that had just been produced. I had to go get a sampling cup, dip it in, and then offer it round to all the operators, because we would sense check that the recipe we were making actually tasted like the recipe it was supposed to be. And weirdly enough, like I'm just someone who can't eat chocolate like before noon, just because it's too early. Fair and enough. I got a lot of slack for that, to be fair.
Sounds like the best place to work ever.
A little bit.
But actually, on a more serious note, my takeaway from your answer is you recognize that you wanted to pursue, the leadership route, right? And typically, a process engineering role doesn't give you many opportunities to do that. So therefore, you found a fit in consulting. And interestingly, what you're doing in consulting is a similitude of what you did in process engineering, just in a different context. And the fact that you're able to do it across, I guess, many, factories, many clients. So that's a very interesting insight for you. For those considering a career in consulting, perhaps they want to switch from maybe process engineering as well into consulting. Can you give some insight into what your day-to-day looks like in consulting?
Yeah, sure. So ultimately, and I think the kind of biggest point to drive home about working in consulting is that you can have multiple careers in consulting itself, right? Like people term consulting a career, but you can actually have multiple careers in consulting. And I'll make that a little bit more tangible. So personally, I've been working in consulting for about 4 years now. And within those 4 years, I've had 4 different roles, and what I would argue are even 4 different careers. And it's not necessarily the typical track. I think most people who join consulting kind of join one main function and continue through. But I can share kind of my personal experience where I mentioned I wanted to start in systems integration. So I started in the kind of systems engineering space, working as a test and automation engineer. ultimately I was actually working on like financial and public sector clients, and fundamentally as a STEM gyali, that just didn't fit with me.
Very
and
different,
yeah, I
isn't
know.
it? Yeah.
And I tried it, and I think that's what's great about consulting is you get that opportunity to try, right? But for me, what I didn't realize I could do in consulting was Industry 4.0 consulting. And that's basically this idea of digital manufacturing consulting, where you are taking tech into factories to kind of transform them, make them more efficient, reduce waste, reduce CO2 emissions, improve quality, and the list goes on. And I always thought I had to go back into the factory with these newfound digital skills to eventually do that kind of cross-focus between factories and innovation. But actually I got to do it on the ground in consulting, working in Industry 4.0. And I think beyond that, there have been so many other opportunities. So even though I've absolutely loved working in Industry 4.0 and I've loved the projects, I mean, for the last 2 years, I was even working on digitization of COVID vaccine manufacturing. So it's probably like the most purposeful job that I've ever done, and something I'll tell my grandkids about, right? But beyond that, like I've now actually moved into our innovation part of the business, which used to be called Deloitte Ventures, is now our kind of market innovation hub, where I lead our circularity portfolio on innovations around sustainable supply chain. And it's really about kind of building the future of sustainability services that Deloitte will one day offer, and really working as an aggregator, creating corporate ventures, or this idea of kind of intrapreneurship, in-house entrepreneurship, where I bring together academia and industry and startups to essentially create ventures that can decarbonize these hard to abate sectors, so manufacturing and supply chains.
I'm just reflecting on your career, and I'm like, you've not really been in industry that long, but the breadth you've covered is incredible. And, I think you have highly likely convinced people to move into consulting. I think what I see there is an enriching career and so many opportunities to do many different things. And I can relate very much to that. Someone who has also in the last 2 years switched to consulting. So Simran, your work extends far beyond your 9 to 5. You're also a champion of many initiatives, across technology, diversity and inclusion. For example, you're a One Young World ambassador. You're also a young global shaper for the World Economic Forum. And again, the list goes on. So can you just describe briefly what you do in those roles?
Yeah, sure. This idea of kind of STEM activism and youth advocacy is really, really pivotal to kind of who I feel is Simran Mohnani to me. And that's kind of been echoed in any role I do, has always been kind of the second track that goes hand in hand with whatever role I do. And it all stems from, growing up, I felt that, I didn't have access to the idea of engineering as a viable or accessible career for women, or even for women who looked like me specifically. And I was very lucky and very, very privileged to, win this competition and get access to a space that literally had a variety of careers on a plate for me to pick from, and realize that, what I wanted to do actually had a name and was called chemical engineering. But there are so many people who don't get access to those kind of opportunities. And that's why I've always kind of felt giving back around like democratizing access to those STEM opportunities has been my way of giving back to the community, I guess. And I probably didn't even realize how bad the situation was actually until I worked in industry as a process engineer. I was, at the time when I joined, I was the only female intern in the manufacturing track. I actually joined a department which, although was the most magical ever, right? It's a chocolate factory, was also a department that had, the first woman working in that department for 100 years. Like, we didn't even have a toilet when I joined, but
sounds insane.
I mean, they actually started building a toilet for me when I joined, which I guess is kind of my claim to fame, having a toilet built in a chocolate factory for you. But ultimately, it has meant that there's a lot of struggles and there's a lot of structural inequalities that we still have to fix. And so kind of when I came back to university, I started working as the vice chair of our Women's Engineering Society, really focused on bringing STEM opportunities to high schoolers, kind of breaking down those barriers that, you know, you can be someone who's working in a factory, but you can also be someone who's working in a high-fly office. You can be someone who wears chunky jewelry and rocks up in sneakers, and that's totally okay, right? Breaking down visually as well as like mentally what it means to be a chemical engineer or an engineer on the ground. And I've continued to do that in running a diversity network here at Deloitte, which is called Codename Maxine, and we kind of started out in the UK, now we're in the US and India and things.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's the kind of same thing I've been doing at One Young World. One Young World is actually this kind of the biggest youth summit focused on social change makers. They kind of term it the Davos for millennial social change makers. And I actually got the opportunity to go to that through Deloitte. So, I mean, I'd recommend anyone who has the opportunity to go because it helped me find my tribe of people who are working on these kind of big holistic structural issues outside of their 9 to 5 per se. And the World Economic Forum Global Shapers community is one of those kind of on the ground spaces for me where I get to pick a project that I feel quite passionate about in my locality, such as, you know, the lack of access to STEM information and, you know, have a group of people that can co-work with me on it.
No, that's amazing to hear. I'm all for STEM activism. I can't speak. I'm all for STEM activism. And I think, given my background as well, I relate so much to you because I think education, information, knowledge can be such a massive leverage. You know, we're where we are today because of the things we knew and the opportunities that were either presented to us or that we went after. So, no, you're doing such amazing things outside of work. And I'm like, how are you able to juggle that?
As are you, woman.
with a career in consulting, it's absolutely amazing. But for anyone out there listening who may also want to lend their voice into those issues, into tackling those issues, what would you recommend they do to get involved? What are some practical steps they can take?
Yeah, sure. So I have a couple of things here. I'd say number one is stand for something. You know, I think we live in a world where sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming. Like you can feel overstimulated because there are people and, you know, bits of information kind of flying at you all the time, right? Whether it's news or, you know, Instagram, anything,
social media,
right?
Yeah.
But, and I think people will remember you for kind of one or two key things, right? So go out into the world, and it's fine if it takes you time to figure out what that was. But for me, kind of, streamlining that narrative that for me, you know, Simran Mohnani stands for climate innovation and STEM activism or gender empowerment has been the brand I get to go forward with. And I think if you stand for something, the minute something around climate innovation comes up or gender empowerment, people are like, oh yeah, there's that person working on it. Let me pull her in, right? And it can be anything, and it can be the most rogue combination of things, right? Which comes back to my point on like when I was really passionate about doing manufacturing and like climate things in manufacturing, you know, people didn't really find that sexy. My mom was like, why are you doing this, girl? But this stuff grows, which brings me onto kind of my second point. If you find something cool, tell people about it. If you're in a water cooler conversation and you see someone doing something really cool, like Tolu's podcast, you know, say it. Say, wow, I find these kind of podcasts that, you know, tell narratives of people and break those stereotypes really cool. The minute you say it, it kind of plants a seed in someone else's head that they can reach out to you about it, right? And I think people do want to sponsor others. It's often they just don't know how, you know, useful or how willing they are to get involved. So those are kind of my two key pieces. I think the last one I'll end on is don't be afraid to think that you need a platform to make change. I remember when I was working as an analyst at Deloitte as well, and me and four other analysts at the time were kind of empowered by everything that was happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. And we just thought our our business could use a better speak up culture. And so we just created a D&I proposal literally off the back of a phone call where we were really passionate, took it straight to a director, and it, got baked into the Black Action Plan for Deloitte's consulting unit with, the 5 of us analysts kind of leading one of the biggest cross-cultural change programs. And we were the youngest team involved in the Black Action Plan. So the idea is, there are amazing organizations where you can find your tribes of people, the Global Shapers, One Young World. There are loads of entrepreneurship communities, but you don't need to look for that platform. You can create that platform if you don't see it already, kind of like, you did yourself. Or equally, find things that you're really passionate about involved in your own area. Even the place where we're recording right now, right, is like a bunch of youth coming together to create a space they didn't see.
Wow, guys. Wow. Powerful.
Thank you.
Simran, powerful. Stand for something and let people know what you're interested in. When I think about that second point in particular, we live in such a globally connected world now that I think it's a lot easier to do in this time and age than it would have been previously. And it's the fact that you don't need a massive platform. You don't need a big platform to make a difference. Yeah. Start small. And to hear that story of 5 analysts, like when you look at the hierarchy of consulting organizations, analysts are at the bottom. And to have been able to come together and, devise something so substantial, it's amazing. I hope you guys are taking notes. I think there's not much more I can add to that. No, that's amazing. Now, coming on to the final question, Simran, if you could go back to your 21-year-old self and offer any piece of advice to her, what would you say?
I would say don't get swayed by what others want you to do. And what I mean by that is I remember coming into the graduate scheme at Deloitte and thinking, everyone thinks cloud and AI is the next big thing. And I did qualification after qualification, Tolu, on cloud engineering and things like that. And I tried to teach myself Python on the weekends, and I just didn't dig it. I just didn't like it. And ultimately, I think I was trying to force myself to find a strength in something that didn't, make my heart pound or make, my eyes shine. Because fundamentally, manufacturing, however weird that is, was where my heart was at. And I think it's kind of easy to be swayed by what everyone else is doing. And often when you work in kind of consulting as well, people will have an agenda for you. They'll think you're good at something, but even if you're good at it, it doesn't mean it needs to be where you want to go, right? And I think challenge yourself to think about what is it that kind of makes your eyes glow? I have this maybe top tip where anytime that I feel a particular spark in life, and it can be like I'm walking down a road and I see something. It can be I see an Instagram reel and it sparks my soul. I write down what that thing is. I remember seeing an Instagram reel of a leaf where they had embedded, they were basically trying to model bioluminescence in leaves. And I found that really cool for some reason. I had no idea why, but I just wrote it down. And I think you start collecting this, this list of things that spark your energy, and you'll start seeing that you can pull out threads around that. So I would say, advice is don't get swayed by what everyone else is doing, because ultimately you got to find your spark. And once you do, that's kind of what you become known for, and it becomes what you stand for. Amazing.
I think that's such a great way to round up the interview. Thank you so much, Simran. I've learned so much from you. I'm going to be watching this interview back to take notes, and I'm sure the others listening will have by no doubt taken a lot away from our conversation. To all you amazing listeners, please make sure to share your takeaways in the comment section. I will also be sharing Simran's details in the description, so look out for it so you can connect with her and ask her any further questions. And see you at the next interview. Thank you.